to Singularity University. I'm Reese Jones, and today we'll talk about some more exotic things a little bit, as is the end of your week, and maybe prompt some questions and discussion. And a little bit, sort of the last talk of the week is about what's worth doing and more distant futures. We talked on Wednesday about the PET brain imaging and consciousness and how you measure things from the outside. And there's some interesting dilemma in that there are people who are high-functioning, normal citizens who, when you actually take an image of their brain, that maybe have very little brain there. This is a disorder called hydrocephaly, but this is an actual person who had a normal job, a normal family, a normal life, and it just happened to be discovered that most of their brain was compressed, and there was no symptoms that they were abnormal. And so one of the things in the brain-body distinction is how much of our thinking and our intelligence and our abilities are specifically related to our brain and the size of our brain. And the common thinking is that most of our capabilities are the total size of our brain, and they happen in our brain. But our ability to swim or our ability to ride a bicycle, for example, much of that capability is in our body, and our mood is regulated to a large extent by food, and that's happening in our intestine and not in our brain. And so the weight of microbes in our body is actually comparable to the weight of neurons in our brain. So the distinction between what is brain and what is body, even from a strict science point of view, is the body is more important than we often give it credit for. So we've already shown a few exponential graphs. This one is a double exponential graph. On the bottom is the size of body, and on the side is the size of brain. And there's essentially a brain to body ratio where some portion of the brain is allocated to our limbic system or our body and our feeling, and a smaller portion of the brain is for thinking. And so some creatures, bats and crows, and dolphins and humans have very similar brain-to-body ratios. And this is a way of looking at intelligence and capability that maybe reflects better how intelligence of a species works than just the size of brain. Dolphins, for example, have a larger brain than humans, but their body is also larger, and so some portion of that brain is for managing the body. Whales, another extreme in the upper corner, have a much larger brain than humans, but they also have a much larger body. And so they're not necessarily have as much of their brain capacity able to do intelligent tasks. Crows or ravens, by example, have a relatively small brain, but they also have a relatively small body, and so they're able to do things at a apparently much higher intelligence level for their size than one would expect based on the size of the brain. So intelligence and capability is more closely related to the brain to body ratio in this exponential way than we would intuitively think about. So Aaron just mentioned exponential curves, and And in nature, things like a population, for example, a population of humans or plants or bacteria, start at an exponential growth phase. But once the capacity of the Earth or the container is reached, the exponential curve turns into a flattening curve, and sometimes goes down if a species goes extinct. And so not all exponential curves go up forever, but the ones that seem to go up indefinitely, as far as we can tell, are those where the information is information, not biochemistry. But even curves in information in physics, it's been shown in quantum computers and in quantum mechanics that information, reading and writing it, actually produces energy or heat in the process of either writing some information, reading some information, or even erasing information generates heat. So there are some physics details that would suggest that even these exponential curves have some limit. So an interesting phenomenon about different species is how long different species live. And there's an assumption that how long a species lives based on food and wear and tear and toxins in the environment and other things. But here's a graph that indicates there's a wide difference in how long different species live that is independent of the environment. And so, an important example is humans and dogs, where in many cases a dog lives in the same house and eats the same food and lives the same lifestyle as the human. But a dog lives a fraction, 1/7 as long as the human in the same house. And so it's not, that difference in lifespan is not a function of lifestyle, it's a function of programming in its DNA, in that some animals are programmed to live a longer lifespan than others, and some a shorter lifespan. And this has more to do with their reproductive strategy and their strategy of parasites and predators in the environment than it has to do with lifestyle biochemistry. And this suggests that how long humans live on average, which is 82 years old worldwide, approximately. And humans have a maximum life expectancy of 123 years. And the average expectancy of females is slightly longer than males. But no human has been identified or verified as living longer than 123 years for females and about 110 years for males. And most humans die well before 100. And statistically, our average life expectancy has been increasing, but that doesn't mean that the maximum life has been changing. It's just that fewer children die, fewer babies die, fewer women die in childbirth, fewer people die in wars. And so the average person now lives longer. And many people make mistakes of assuming if the average life expectancy is going up, the maximum life expectancy is also going up. And there's no science that suggests that the maximum life expectancy is changing. And based on the prior comment, if the life expectancy is like between dogs and humans, it's something that's programmed in the DNA. It's software, like we talked about on Wednesday. And that software can be modified, where the software says, have puberty now, have menopause now, die now. Those programs can be changed to some extent. And so we have examples of species living many times longer than humans, just like we humans live many times longer than dogs. And this almost certainly is programmable in the software DNA. So most people, or many people, are familiar with a philosopher named Maslow, who created Maslow's hierarchy of needs for humans. And the most basic important thing is food and water and shelter and air, and then safety, and then a feeling of belonging and friendship, and maybe pride and self-esteem, and then self-actualization. And this was conceived of before the internet. And so what's important for a human has perhaps changed a little bit, where many people aren't happy if they don't have Wi-Fi. And they may be happy if they have Wi-Fi for a while, but as soon as they run out of battery, then they're unhappy again. And so as long as they have battery, they're good, but once the batteries run out, they need to have a charger. So the hierarchy of human needs has become a little bit more technological with the internet and electricity and communications that was not important to people until recently. And then, of course, you have to have the Wi-Fi attached to the internet, which is attached to all the other people on the planet. So the sense of what it means to be a human has changed. And many humans are evolving into hybrid, biological with our brain and our body, and electronic creatures. And that most people now have a phone, and a phone is attached, there's synapse, like a synapse between nerve cells. The phone is a synapse between myself and the internet. And it's part of human life experience now. And inside the internet, historically used to be a mix of people and electronics. Here's an example of how a router used to work when routers were run by humans and switchboards inside the internet, which is a combination of biology and electricity. And the same thing is true of physical networks, like FedEx or UPS, which at the center of those networks of trucks and planes and ships and delivery logistics is still some people. But both these things are becoming more highly automated with more intelligent systems to become going from hybrid bioelectric or hybrid biomatter networks to purely electric. So the internet runs on a protocol standardized around the world, which is called TCP/IP. And this means transmission control protocol, which is how I'm transmitting to one of you, and internet protocol, which is how all of the people connect together. And this is managed by routers. Now, you can develop a similar network where the information that's moved around the network is physical and moved in packets attached to drones. And the drones have to pick up and recharge, like at routers. And it's also an internet of matter. And a Singularity company from recently is called MatterNet, to be the physical matter equivalent of internet that moves matter instead of data. Now, an interesting future potential is an internet of feelings and emotion. And I would call this a limbic internet, which is the feelings, like you can feel my body if I'm nervous or happy or sad. And that's part of the network that already exists with humans, and that's how we feel each other. And this could be more formalized into an internet-type structure. There's a further extension, which is internet of an ecosystem, which maybe a rainforest has many different creatures of life, different species, and how they communicate and how they are interconnected. And of course, people are connected to ecosystems. So we talked yesterday a little bit about how the internet of, this is the routers carrying the signals around the internet. But the Earth, of course, is an ecosystem as well, where all of the things, living and non-living, are connected together in a complicated ecosystem. So some people might be familiar with a Harvard professor named Timothy Leary, who died in the 1990s. But before he died, he was made an interesting graph that looks at an exponential change in the number of realities per day that we have access to. And perhaps 100 years ago, we had stories from friends, books, and other kinds of explanations of realities. Then came movies and television and computers and internet, and now is coming virtual reality and YouTube, and there are now billions of realities from your phone that you have access to every day. And this is increasing at a very rapid rate and continues to increase. And so I'll sort of wind up with an origin of life, like, well, we're life. How did we get here? And life either could have started biochemically on this planet, or it could have arrived here from somewhere else. And there's reason to think that it did arrive from somewhere else. And the star in the solar system where we are doesn't have enough energy to create the heavy molecules of life, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and so forth. So we know that the basic components of life came from somewhere else, from a different solar system and from a different planet than Earth. And the energy to create some of these heavier molecules came from either the Big Bang or other cosmology explosions where stars explode at a higher energy than our current sun and can create atoms that are heavier than the helium and hydrogen that we have coming from our sun. And so the components of life came from somewhere else. And here's another exponential graph that is logarithmic on one side, and this is time in billions of years. And the dots on the graph are different forms of life that have evolved on Earth, on this planet, with the first being prokaryotes, which are simple cells, then eukaryotes, which are basically cells inside of cells, then multicellular organisms, which are groups of cells, then things into fish and mammals and plants and so forth. But if you just take those creatures when they evolved and when we find them in the fossil record, and you plot them on an exponential graph like this over time, and then you draw a straight line through it, you see that the straight line fits the data fairly well, and projects back, well, the origin of life must be about 10 billion years ago or more. And so the problem is that Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. And so it's, even if life started on this planet, and there's lots of theories about how that would be, it clearly got very complicated very fast, from just chemistry to single cells. And then it slowed down. And why would it slow down? And so there's a theory of how life, very likely, both the elements of life and the components of life and the even complexity of life started before Earth was formed and arrived here either on comets or asteroids from somewhere else, and that this is a new area of some controversy. And then life as arising from matter, like what is life and how is it different than the chair or the floor, and that life may be a higher energy state of matter that just as we have solids and liquids and gas that are more energetic, life may be a further more energetic state of matter. And when we change from life to not life, like when we die, our biochemistry is the same, our genetics are the same, our nerves are connected the same, but so we have the same matter and the same structure, so we've just changed from not life to life. And I mentioned on Wednesday the other way, going from parts to living things that is building life out of non-living parts. And so the remaining issue is sort of, well, what does it mean to be alive, and how does it change from being alive to dead? And so that's being conscious. And so these are the medical levels of consciousness where if I'm dead, I'm not conscious. If I'm asleep or under anesthesia, the lowest level is can I be aroused? Like if you poke me, do I wake up? The next, and so that would be a surgical anesthesia level. Then responsive is if you're cutting me open to do surgery, do I wake up and say stop doing that? And then can I understand what's happening? And then do I have a community of people? And so there are people who are technically alive, but they're not arousable, they're not responsive, they don't understand what's happening, and they certainly don't have community. So the definition of what's being alive and what's being unconscious and what's being conscious, and then what's being what we would call normal is a continuum. I'll stop the slides here. We talked about this yesterday, or Wednesday. But I think it would be a good time if there's any questions.
Okay, I got a question. The university here, my understanding is you study the exponential growth. So now I think it's reasonable. We are in the exponential growth stage. But the problem is what result you get, what we should do. The situation just like, I'm thinking a man living in a small village till 50 years old and never grow up, and suddenly moving to the Times Square. What he will do? I think he will feel lost.
Yeah.
The information, the data for him is too much.
Yes.
So what we can do now?
Well, so the man in the small village might start with getting a phone, and because of the exponentially improving capability of the internet and the internet coming from satellites and balloons and the phones becoming almost free, that person, just like the Timothy Leary example, goes from living in the village where they have their friends and their family and the stories from the village, and the reality is that village life and maybe farming or what they do. But then they have a little phone in their hand that is a window to an exponential world. And so even before they leave the village, they have access, and all people could have access to an exponentially increasing world. where instead of there being one TV channel, there's 1 billion choices. And instead of there being one book, there's 1 billion books, and more information than that. And so that's a little bit like a gateway or a door into an exponentially complicated world. And so that same gateway, if they take their phone to Times Square, the phone can be their assistant and their guide and say, here's where food is, here's where you can stay. Even though this looks like a very complicated world, they have an assistant, maybe an artificially intelligent assistant.
Sorry, I think the point here is very difficult for him to
Yes.
choose the food.
Yes.
Not the point he found the food. They have too much to choose.
Yes, well, and so the phone, especially an artificially intelligent phone, can be a wise assistant that can say, you like rice in your village? Here's where you can find rice in Times Square at the time of day that you're there. You sleep at a certain time in your village? Here's where you can sleep in Times Square. So the internet and the phone, with intelligence about the person and the context that they're in, can help transition somebody from a simple world to a complex world. Does that answer your question?
I think, I give you an example like the rice. Still, maybe the phone give him 10 choice.
Yeah.
Have a very nice rice restaurant, okay?
Yeah.
But still have another 100 choice. Tell him there's 100 food much better than the rest. Now he feel lost.
Yeah, well, this is true, and that we're in the early days of the exponential improvement of the internet to understand that person and to simplify the 100 choices down to the best one. And so the person has to learn to trust the internet, and the internet has to become smarter about the person to say, even though there are 100 choices, this is the best for you. And part of the difficulty of that is the business economics, and that the companies that develop the software to do that, like Google or Facebook, they're also concerned about making money. And so they will recommend more expensive restaurants than maybe is the best choice for that person. And so you're right, this is a problem, but we're in the early days of internet being part of people and helping people to a level that you can trust.
I'm thinking you are talking about one day if the technology is good enough, even they can help people to make decisions.
Yes. Well, even better, if the technology is even better than that, the internet can make the decision for the person better than the person would even know to make themselves. And it can make the decision before they even know they want to make the decision. Like it'll say, in 1 hour you'll be hungry, so why don't you start walking in this direction? And at the time you arrive, you'll be at the food that you choose. And that's anticipatory virtual assistants, or AI, which is kind of the state of the art of internet AI today. But it's something that is getting better on an exponential path for the same reasons that we've talked about.
In your origin of life lesson, I'm a firm believer of Adam and Eve. God created Adam and Eve. We are all the children of Adam and Eve. Okay, I still believe that the love story. But you are suggesting that life may come from somewhere outside of the earth. What does that? How does that have anything to do with the singularity we're talking about? I'm missing that point.
So first of all, it's an exponential increase in the complexity of life. And part of increasing complexity is also computers and internet, which are also increasing in their complexity at an exponential rate. So both life and internet are increasing exponentially. And so it's the same mathematics of how the increasing complexity of life and the increasing complexity of computers is happening on a natural pace. And it may be that the natural evolution of these things, and there are people who theorize that it doesn't matter whether the complexity is alive or not alive, that there's a natural tendency to increase the complexity at an exponential pace. And so part of singularities is where the concept of the Big Bang comes from, is in physics a singularity point that expands exponentially for 13.5 billion years from an origin to now. Now it's quite possible in cosmology and physics that the Big Bang for us was a black hole for somebody else. And our universe is inside somebody else's black hole. And we see other black holes in our universe, which could be Big Bang for other people that we can't see through. And so in the singularity term from Einstein's physics equations, it's the same mathematics. At Singularity University, we focus more on the practical technology of today and the near future as opposed to a billion-year timescales. But it's the same mathematics, the same concepts, the same exponential changes. And it doesn't mean that the romantic version of theology of creation can exist, where the black hole or the Big Bang could be an egg, and how that romantically came into being, all kinds of interesting beliefs can happen. And so the Pope told Stephen Hawking he should not think about things that happened before the Big Bang, because it confuses people. The Pope told Stephen Hawking, the cosmology physicist, that he shouldn't contemplate what happened before the Big Bang, our Big Bang, because it confuses people about their beliefs and thoughts about the origin of life and the universe and everything. But it's not inconsistent with many different beliefs of creation. It's just the details.
I think we have room for one more question. Okay, we could. Go ahead.
我一个很简单的问题啊，就是我们举 IC 芯片设计的例子，它一开始是符合摩尔定律的，然后到近些年它就已经不太符合摩尔定律了。不太符合什么？不太符合摩尔定律的那个递进的说法。那所以我想知道，就是这个指数发展它在什么情况下会被打断？对，你前面也有一个图，大概就是说它是一个环境的原因。它有没有内在的原因？它就是被打断，或者是对，就是不同的情形下它。什么时候就你的这个指数型的理论的边界在哪里？什么时候它就开始导致？因为我们看到就是 IC 芯片这个例子，我明显看到它是。
Yes, I understand this question. So Moore's law is from Gordon Moore, who is one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation that makes integrated circuit transistor chips. And his law is about how many transistors in silicon can you put on a one-dimensional chip that's on a two-dimensional surface. And so there is a limit in physics when the transistors become the size of an atom. And that you can't make the transistor in silicon chemistry to be smaller than an atom. And we're getting close to that limit for silicon chips on a two-dimensional wafer. Now, the wafer could become three-dimensional. You could have layers. So then it becomes more like biochemistry in a brain. And you can expand this way. Another way that it can expand is in a quantum computer, where the information is in the spin of atoms inside the atom. So you can put many computations inside one atom. So even if physically you can only place one atom, you can do multiple computations in the same atom. And so in this graph, the quantum, or the Moore's law applies only to the last 30 years. And before that was physical transistors, and then vacuum tubes, and mechanical devices, and even punch cards, going back over 100 years. So technically, this is not Moore's law, and it's not only about transistors and being silicon on a chip, but this is more of a natural law about the performance improvement of computation in different kinds of substrates. So there are substrates, the physical method, that are beyond what can be done in silicon, that are in research stages now, like quantum computing, or biochemical computing, or multi-dimensional chips, that could continue this curve. And the interesting unknown, is this a natural law independent of people? Like, would this happen without Intel? My guess is yes.
Okay, all right, so thank you, Reese, thank you very much. Thank you very much.